I just feel so strongly about this because I'm like, why do we keep doing the same thing? It just doesn't work.
On the manager level, it sounds like the value stream here is around making the implicit explicit.
We want to put ownership in the individual's hands to say, listen, it's not just about career. There's other factors that play a role, and here's what it is for you.
I think it's terribly important to insist on individual values.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Initiative, creation, all these things which we value. It's now possible to make organizations on a larger scale than was ever possible before.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Teach people to analyze the kind of things that are said to them.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Learning Culture Podcast. I am your host, Andrew Barry, and this is a show about building cultures of learning inside companies. And joining me today is Elena Agaragimova. Elena is a talent development professional, career coach, podcaster, wellness enthusiast, and now the founder of ShiftWell.ai. In this conversation, Elena and I talk about her diverse career journey, emphasizing the importance of the middle manager role inside organizations and the need for effective leadership training, especially for this population. We unpack the inception of her company, ShiftWell, which aims to address the shortcomings that she has seen in traditional talent development by addressing a more holistic approach to employee engagement and performance. My big takeaway from this conversation is that organizations need to do a much better job than just addressing these surface level things that typical employee engagement surveys address. Another big lesson is the importance of active listening and effective communication, especially as workplaces adopt AI more and more. Finally, the big shift that Elena and her team are looking to make with ShiftWell is a move away from a one-size-fits-all solution to understanding the deeper needs and wants of every individual so that the individuals can work on their own growth, managers can have better conversations with their team, and organizations can start to make systemic changes that address the challenges and promote growth across the organization. I know you're going to enjoy this conversation. There are a lot of great lessons here from Elena's journey and some insights into this exciting new tool they're building. So with that, please sit back, relax, and enjoy my episode with Elena Agaragimova. Elena, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Excited to chat.
Yeah. So I want to start at the beginning and let's do like a quick run through the big stops in your career journey. What I'm interested in, you've worked in lots of different countries, lots of different industries. So you've seen a lot of things. I'm curious to learn more about the patterns and the different perspectives that you've picked up along the way that have informed how you develop leaders in your current role.
Yeah. I started my career in higher education, actually. So I was, I studied international studies and political science, and I wanted to go to nonprofit world. And the next best thing was going to be higher ed for me. So I kind of started there, spent, a few years just really working in different departments on campuses, understanding how students learn, what drives them and so on. And then I was like, well, I kind of had enough of that for now. It was a little bit too slow moving. So I shifted to corporate learning. And so, and there was just like a natural transition from working with youth to then working with professionals in corporate and senior leadership and so on. And as I mentioned, I've done this in different parts of the world. So I've spent 8 years of my life in the Middle East. I got to travel to 14 different countries, delivering sessions, workshops, coaching to organizations. Spent a lot of time with the middle managers in particular. I don't really have as much experience with the leadership, but it is something I dip into, but I'm not quite there yet. Mostly young talent and middle management. One of the biggest things I guess I've learned is that no matter where I've been, whether you're, in Southeast Asia or you were in South America or you're in North America or Middle East or even Europe, at the end of the day, we're dealing with humans. Sure, there's cultural pieces to it. There's cultural things, but ultimately what drives us as human beings, what drives performance in the workplace is pretty much the same across board because it's just human beings. So, and we can dive a little bit more into those specific kind of areas, but that's been like my biggest takeaway.
Yeah. And I love that. And I love the emphasis on that middle management role. It's something that we also focus on a lot. I think it's an underserved part of the population when you look at the employee life cycle. I'm curious what drew you to that area?
So middle managers, I feel like the ones that are just kind of left out of the equation. So, and they're kind of in the middle of, they need to deliver on their projects. They need to motivate their teams. They need to motivate themselves. They need to, give attention to the low performers in their teams. And at the same time, they need to translate all of that and manage up, right? So they're just like in this middle. And frankly speaking, not many managers are trained to be people leaders. They're kind of fell into those roles, right? Like you're just do really well as a technical person, for example. And, somebody in your company says, you've done so well as an individual contributor. We now want you to help others do the same thing. And now we want you to train them and motivate them and so on, right? And lead them. And I think statistically they say like a manager, in the US at least, like a manager will spend 10 years in a managerial role before they get, any kind of training. So it's about 75% plus of managers will spend that many years before they even touch into like differences between leadership and managing, individual contribution, executing on a project versus actually leading a team. How do you drive high performance? How do you motivate your team? And so on. And then, throw in the multi-generational kind of workforce that we have today. Throw in international work and global stuff. Throw in the business cultures. Throw in the remote work. So I think they're just like in a tough spot.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that particular, they're in the middle in that they have the communication lines are the key part here. You have to know how to communicate down effectively, communicate up, communicate sideways. It's a very unique role in that sense, right? Anything peripheral to that is kind of only looking at one or two of those aspects. So you come at this from your company, let's talk sort of founding moments now. So you built these years of experience in different countries, different industries. You've got that academic background, that corporate background, and you've taken all of that and you've obviously seen something that inspired you starting Shift. And I'm wondering what that is. What is that spark? When was that moment? Maybe you can take us back to that where you were like, I just have to do this no matter how hard it's going to be.
Mm. I don't know if it was a moment versus a years of frustration, years of just frustrations. And part of it was, so I've trained, I've facilitated workshops, I've done management training, I've developed programs. And every time I would do something, it would be like, okay, great. I feel like I added value in this case, but it's not really, I'm just putting Band-Aids. So for an example, companies will hire corporate trainers like, oh, we need to improve engagement, or we need to increase productivity, or we need to train our staff. And then, there was years I would go in, right? Like I need to make the money. And I'm like, what, let me just make this happen. I realized that a 1 week, management training is not going to transform the individual per se, but it could be like a little snapshot into the potential they have if they actually invest in these kind of trainings, right? But then over the years, I was like, I'm really, how do I say this? Like I'm doing myself a disservice as a professional in this field because it's starting to become where learning and development field is already very much the first to go in anything because they say there's no ROI. Like, what's the impact of the things that trainers and corporates, companies do? And they're like, well, there's no ROI. There's like, what are the people actually learn? Only 7% of learning is maintained after 1 week post a workshop and so on. So then I started looking like, well, what is it really? Like, what is it that drives people to learn? Like, what is it that makes us a high performer? And how do I actually make change, like help people make change happen? So I think it was just like over the years, you start to come to a conclusion that we're just putting Band-Aids collectively on broken legs. And there's such an opportunity to change that and actually drive behavior change and drive performance and drive engagement in a way that we're not doing this now. And an example would be, if we're talking about middle managers, the biggest thing right now, over the last few years, at least, has been burnout. I mean, I don't know how many times I've seen the word burnout. I've seen the word disengagement. And globally, we spend about on well-being alone, like well-being programs, $65 billion, right? Like at least in 2024. So $65 billion is spent on well-being programs. So this is where, listen, if you're burned out, you just need a breathing exercise. So we're going to give you a subscription to like pick your application. Or then they say like, oh, people are disengaged, right? Like they're disengaged. So let's put them into a training to help them, do better in their jobs or help them become more productive, because then maybe they'll be a little bit more engaged. Or let's throw in a team building activity, right? And so we spend so well-being is separate. Talent development, learning development, we spend about $365 billion globally in corporations on talent development, with very little ROI, and none of these things change. Engagement doesn't get better. Burnout doesn't get better. The latest Gallup reports you see, still only 25% of the global workforce is actually engaged. So obviously engagement strategies don't work. We're more burnt out, particularly middle managers, than ever before. So obviously, sit in a meditation session, listen to XYZ probably doesn't work. So maybe there's something else to this engagement and well-being and all these things that we're pushing, that we're trying to solve with the one-off, one-size-fits-all training, right? So, and this is where all these, as you can see, I just feel so strongly about this, because I'm like, why do we keep doing the same thing? It just doesn't work. So, and I can talk a little bit more about what does work.
Yeah, no, I love this. I see this as well ourselves, and I think it's often a function of, and you see this at the education level, right? At the grassroots as well, of this, and it's an important need to be able to democratize access, right? So you want to be able to scale, like in a corporate, you talk about scaling programs and being able to give everyone an opportunity to learn and to grow. And so that is a worthwhile cause and something that's needed, but it also creates a one-size-fits-all kind of approach, and it's a band-aid in many ways, right? And so I can definitely resonate with that. Now, you've got a new product out now that is seeking to solve this, right? And you're very excited about it, and we've talked a little bit about it. And I want to get into that, but before we do that, because I'm as a founder as well, and I think many can relate to this, there's an evolution to coming up with a good idea. And I'm curious if you tried different other things before that you've kind of landed on where you are now.
Yeah, great question. Back in, so I'll take even further. I've always been a wellness enthusiast. So I grew up in a family of athletes. We care very much about our physical well-being, mindset. We grew up very much in that space. And I always felt like that really helped me be better at work. So I started to recognize the impact of mindset and physical well-being outside of your job, and how it actually impacts the work that you do, what drives you, the energy you have, the creativity you have, and so on. So I really very much care about that. Throughout my own journey and career journey, I realized that things that work for me don't work for somebody else. I've sat through a lot of these different assessments. I've taken every personality and leadership development assessment out there, I think, at this stage. Well, maybe not every single one, but a ton of them. Let's put it that way. I've looked into behavior change, right? Back in 2017, 2018, I remember there was a lot of books that started coming out around behavior change. And from a neuroscience perspective, I remember I took a course in Columbia University, and it talked about neuroscience and coaching, and it talked about how the brain reacts for how does behavior change happen in the brain, and what factors need to play a role in order for change to happen. So that takes you back to just how I start learning about these different pieces that then fall into ShiftWell, which is the product. And then back in 2019, I was part of a company with a co-founder, and we basically started a company focused on performance and well-being, because at that stage, we're both there's something more to performance, and there's got to be this well-being piece. Frankly speaking, looking back at it now, we were too early in the market. We didn't have the tools necessarily available. And it was still of a newer concept. Well-being was being pushed a lot, but there still wasn't a clear clear connection between performance in a workplace and well-being. And then fast forward pandemic, all of that well-being, all of that working remotely, and all these different factors that came into play. And I think today more than ever, and also research caught up in our space, and people are like, oh, like, it's not just about work. It's actually also about your life and how you feel in your life. And a lot of how you feel in your life has to do with your health, mental health, physical health, your environment, your social, the relationships you have in your life, right? And so on. So that's what actually drives us at work. And, and if we were to spend a little bit more time on that, maybe that's the magic pill if we had one. So that's kind of how it all came about. And with evolution of AI and, again, like I always say, like looking back at Bestern, which was when we started in 2019 with my business partner at that time, if we only had AI, like I felt like that's what we were missing, you know what I mean? And so now with this new product, taking all of those learnings, all of these kind of just things that I knew most of my life, but it didn't connect, then I now started to connect. And obviously, I have two co-founders who are also equally as passionate and brilliant in their specific kind of expertise area. Then together we're like, maybe this is a solution.
Yeah. So let's unpack what that is, because I'm glad we sort of you had that journey, and I don't think people talk enough about that journey. There's a lot of like trial and error that gets to this point, and you've picked up a lot of valuable lessons that have got you to this point now. So what is ShiftWell? What is the product that you are so excited about?
Yeah. So it's a tech solution, essentially looking at a person from a holistic point of view. So again, when we talk about engagement, when we talk about well-being, when we talk about high performance, it's right now in organizations, you have either everything's on the manager, right? Like it's like, oh, the big bad wolf is the manager who just doesn't want to give the employee times, right? Or you have organizations who are just throwing tons of money on, Fitbits and yoga mats and a subscription to apps that don't work. And so a lot of resources are being spent in areas that just put band-aids, if that, onto the actual problem. So we look at like, what's the root cause of people not being engaged, people not performing, right? And so on. And what we kind of looked at is that there's a lot of research. So this is all obviously research-based. There's a ton of research out there around what drives our performance in general. And a lot of it is our mindset, our career, how much we're progressing, right? Relationships we have at work, the quality of relationships at work and outside of work, our health, purpose, environment. So all of these different things are elements that make up the unique combination of what makes you. And that's different for everybody. So what we do is we help people identify, where you are in comparison to these elements and what are the gaps that you need to work on that make you a high performer. So for somebody like you, for example, you might prioritize career and health more than relationships and environment, for example. For somebody else, it's something else, right? So it's one size fits one, not one size fits all. And we're targeting specific things, all the different elements that make you great at whatever you want to be great at, from all these different elements, not just, are you meeting your, objectives or KPIs in your performance view, because there's so many other factors that impact that. And so that's from an individual standpoint. We want to put ownership in the individual's hands to say, listen, it's not just about career. There's other factors that play a role. And here's what it is for you. Here's the gaps. And in addition to that, with AI, we're going to put an AI coach in your pocket that no matter what time of the day you need help, or you need help in terms of like working out next steps, somebody to keep you accountable. We have Clara, who's our AI. And Clara will be there available and accessible to you whenever you need to make that behavior change. Whenever you're, looking at what's the smallest thing you can do today and how can you make that happen? Like she's there to kind of support you. So that's on the individual side. On the manager, as I've mentioned, managers are overwhelmed. And frankly speaking, it's, is it their responsibility to care about the relationships you have, the health? No, it's not. That needs to be an individual ownership. But what the manager needs to know about is if collectively their teams are struggling in X, Y, and Z, and that's something that they can impact, they need to know about it, right? And it's not just like a leadership assessment or an engagement tool or, can they work from home or not? It's much more deeper than that. So it's like, what kind of behaviors are you promoting as a manager, right? So there's certain aggregate data that you can gather from this data that your team does, right? To actually impact, or next time you go into a one-to-one session with an employee, there are certain things that you can tap into to actually have a productive conversation. When you have that performance review, you're ready to have that conversation. In addition to that, the person shows up prepared. And then finally, on the organizational level, there are certain things at an organizational level, like systemic things that impact performance and engagement. So it goes back to culture, the company culture and so on. And so there's certain things that you can gather from this data, right? To understand you as a company, where should you actually be investing your money? Should you be investing in that new LMS because it looks cool and it has this AI component, or is it a waste of time? Should you be giving your people subscriptions to LinkedIn Learning because you think it's going to make them better leaders, or have they even touched it? So it's like, where can you actually put your money? So like, it's a tool to help, individuals take ownership, managers to have more productive conversations and behavior change that drives team performance. And then for the organization to actually put money in things that will make the business better, right? Instead of just wasting it away. So that's kind of in a nutshell.
Yeah. So let's unpack that a little bit. So what I'm hearing is one of the ideas I've been thinking a lot about recently is this idea that happiness is a function of kind of stopping doing the things that you think you should do and doing more of the things that you want to do or that you need to do. And why that's so hard, and I speak for myself when I say this, is it's really hard to figure out what you want and what you need. It's actually really hard to do that because you have to be radically honest with yourself. You have to be vulnerable with yourself. There's a lot of like introspection. And I've been working through that kind of stuff myself. And so this idea of like letting go of all these things that you've taught yourself you think you need to actually figuring out what you do need. It sounds like what you're describing is a tool to help people identify those things. Does that resonate?
Yeah, it does. It is, you're right. It's very hard to identify, which is why, I'm just even thinking like a lot of the, like engagement surveys and things like that, like they don't really tap into what you need, or leadership assessments. They don't tell you what you need. They just tell you where you are.
Yeah.
So Andrew, here's where you are.
Bucket.
Exactly.
Right.
So it's not tailored to you. It's tailored towards like, and some aggregate data that they have, right? That they're like, okay, this is what makes a good leader, and here's where you lack, type thing, right? Like, or it's just like, it's a very generic, I don't want to say it's generic, but it doesn't tell you what you actually need. It just gives you, it tells you where you are, and it doesn't actually help you then have a behavior that you might need to change. And what does that look like? It just tells you where you are, which is why like, typically when you take any assessment, take a Gallup, take a DISC, you need a debrief session. You can't just read an assessment, and you can interpret in many different ways. And that's why you need a professional that will have people certified in these things to help you uncover what does it really mean. And all it really tells you is like where you are, but it doesn't actually tell you what you need. And then furthermore, it puts you in a category of like, this is what makes a great leader, right? Or this is what it means to, you need to be in the red under a disc if you want to be driver and you want to push and etc. But is it really what you need? And is it going to work for you? Right. Is that something you should work towards? And again, it looks at very specific things, very work related things versus holistic view of also your health, your relationships, your well-being and mindset.
Mm. Okay, yeah, that I can definitely see useful on the individual level. On the manager level, it sounds like the value stream here is around making the implicit explicit. So now you have a common language that you can have with the person that you're performance managing, around what those needs and wants are. And I'm wondering if you could give maybe an example or two of the types of insights that this tool can generate.
Yeah. So a quick note on the manager side. So the manager doesn't actually, so the individual has control of how much they share with the manager. So obviously, the manager doesn't need to know, I don't know, about your physical health. Like, it's unless you really want, and you can share that in your conversation with your manager. The manager is more of like, it's more focused on that performance. It's more focused on like, do you feel like you belong in a workplace? So there's certain questions, for example, that we put in to help a manager, to help the AI and assessment recognize this is where a disconnect might be for this person in the workplace. And here's how you might be impacting it, right? Like, as a manager, here's what you can do. So that's an important part, because we obviously don't want to give all the information, the personal stuff, to the manager or to the organization. So there's definitely a huge piece about that. And the individual, it's up to them if they want to release even any information. What it does for the manager is it gives them an overview of their team. So let's say you have a team of 10 people, and let's say a team of 10 people, they said that they don't feel safe in their team meetings. I'm just saying, like, that was the outcome, right? Or let's say they are, for example, or maybe they feel disengaged, like they're just not excited about coming to work. They're not excited about the work that they're doing. They don't trust the company, right? So here, as a manager, you can actually make an impact, because you can say, okay, 10 people, 8 people out of 10 people told me they don't feel, they don't feel aligned with the work that they're doing, right? And so it's like, what can I do as a manager? And what you can do as a manager is to start having conversations and looking at, do you even know what your team members want? Like, do you have a relationship with each team member to understand what drives them? What are their values? What kind of work they find exciting? What kind of strengths and skills they have that contribute to the work that they do? Or are you just placing people randomly because you feel like you need to put a butt in the seat, right? Which is sometimes happens. So that's one thing, right? Are you as a manager creating a safe space for people to share ideas, or are you just throwing, demands and they just go and execute? Like, do you spend time listening to your team members? So I think all of these symptoms can come out, and you as a manager can do something about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that. And then at an organizational level, what are some practical things people that are running talent development, even executive level people, can think about doing to create the kind of culture that promotes growth, right? That promotes personal growth at the company?
Yeah. So far, what we're kind of seeing, so it's a new product, so I don't want to make things up. So I'll just tell you what we do kind of see is that some of the things that you can impact as an organization is particularly like on the health aspect. That's a simple one, right? And simply because there's a lot of companies spending money on EAP, like employee different programs, or they're spending a lot of money into benefits around like health or, tools that people can use. But if let's say you look at it as a company and you say, okay, for the past year, we've been investing in well-being programs. But, looking at this data, actually the well-being of our employees, like, people are burnt out, they're not sleeping well. So that's like one thing, right? Like, one of the questions we have is around sleep, because it relates to health so much, right? So it's like, if you see people are collectively, not getting enough sleep, so there must be something going on, because it's not like every 100 people have poor personal lives and they don't sleep. Maybe there's something there, right? And it's like, and on top of that, if you are investing in well-being programs or stress management programs, but stress levels are high, and and so on, so this is a chance to just be like, what's going on, and audit where you actually spend your time. And there's different things you can do, but it's it goes back to that. Like, that's a pretty straightforward example.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And so there may be some people listening to this going like, well, that sounds like an employee engagement survey, right? And some, everyone's have different examples of that. What would you say to people who might be thinking that? How does this different? How are you tackling this problem uniquely?
Yeah, so a lot of engagement surveys are around how people feel. So usually, like, the questions are engagement surveys. First of all, they're very generic, they're very general. It's more about how people feel in that moment about the company. So if you think about the engagement surveys, a lot of them are about the company, about how the person feels in that company. It doesn't tap into the health. It doesn't tap into the mindset. It doesn't tap into any of these other things, for starters. So it's very, and then on top of that, like, the results, the results that they get, like, I mean, I don't know about you, but I personally don't know, I can't give you a solid example of a company who did an employee engagement survey and actually took some actions from it and changed something, because it's very based on feelings. There's not a lot of data they can go off of. There's nothing specific. It's very just, and it's, again, it's they are looking at that moment in time that person's taken. And that, I mean, you don't know, that person could have had a horrible day. They could have got a fight in their coworkers, or it could have been a crazy week at work. And then you give them this employee. So it's not very accurate data, frankly speaking. Right. So, and it's the kind of questions, I mean, I haven't looked at like the questions itself in a long time, but from what I remember, at least from a few months ago, engagement surveys are just very generic, and it's more focused on like how you feel about X, Y, and Z versus you, and actually like what are the things that you experience from all these different elements, not just from a work perspective. And it's based on feelings, and feelings are important, don't get me wrong, but that feeling can change, versus when you dig deeper and you ask it in different ways, it provides a much more accurate report and data about where you are and what you need and how you can change what you need next, right?
Okay, awesome. I'm very excited to try this out. I'm excited to follow your progress and see how you also just learn from having this out in the wild. I know you've gone through beta testing recently, and you've been iterating on the product then, and I'm sure as you start to open up doors to a lot more companies, that product's going to evolve. You're going to learn, you're going to make it better. So very excited to hear how that goes.
It's exciting. It's, I think, you can probably relate. I'm a builder and creator at heart. And like, I love this process. I'm like, let's break it. Like, let somebody break it. Let somebody question us. You like, don't tell me, I always say like, don't tell me what I'm doing wrong. Tell me what we can do better. And it's like, that's the process that's exciting. But at least from what we've seen so far, there's a lot of different parts that we're doing that are out there, but nobody's doing what we're actually doing, and like the way we're tapping into it. And that's exciting. And also, competition is good. So like, the more the merrier type thing. Like, competition is what drives, the product innovation and the businesses. So the innovation and stuff like that. So that's the cool part. So we're very excited. I really, again, of course, I'm very hopeful for it, and I see a lot of benefit, and I really genuinely see it as solving problems. Because when I take it, I'm like, dang, like, you're so spot on. Like, that's a great, like, yes, this is exactly what I need. And it's a great tool. It's a great tool, and AI is amazing now. And I'm very excited for all of it.
That's awesome. And I can imagine once you've had that feeling, and now you've got a coach, an AI coach that can then, so you've like, yes, this is me. And then you've got that AI coach that can then help you become the full potential version of you. Very, very exciting. So let's end this off as a conversation with one last question. And this is a question that I ask to most guests around leadership advice, life lessons, anything that you want to leave the listeners with for this episode. Now, you're a podcast host yourself. We recorded an episode together as well. We'll put the link in the show notes. So it can come from a podcast that you've hosted, maybe a guest that you had, maybe from your own experience. What's like one lesson that you carry forward for yourself that you want to share with everyone?
Yeah, so I've recorded over 225 episodes with people that are just way smarter than me in more areas than one. And you were a recent guest as well. And one thing that I hear continuously, whether we're talking about work or leadership or even personal lives, is just be a good listener. Truly learn to listen. Listen, be open to what, just with an open mindset, just listen. So whether it's in your personal relationships, whether it's at work, I think that's like the biggest lesson. And somebody who was not a good listener, and I'm still working on it. I think that's been like, maybe that's why it's the thing that stuck most of me is just like, I think if we were just better listeners collectively, world would be a better place.
Wow. I almost want to just cut it right there. That was beautiful. I completely agree. And that's something I've been working on. I think it's a superpower. And especially going forward as AI becomes much more ubiquitous, we are all going to have to learn to communicate better. And a vital part of communication, probably the starting point of communication is listening. Elena, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your passion for this new product. Where can folks go to find out more, to connect with you?
Yeah, so with me, LinkedIn is where I hang out the most. So Elena Agaragimova. For the product, ShiftWell.ai is where you can find us, and feel free to reach out.
Amazing. Thanks, Elena.
Thank you.
Hello. I hope you enjoyed that episode. It's Andrew again with a quick message. If you'd like to support the show, the best way to do that is to leave us ratings and reviews where you listened. If you're on YouTube, hit the like and subscribe buttons and feel free to leave a comment. We love hearing from our listeners and viewers. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please take the time to give us a rating and leave a review. Once again, we love hearing from our loyal listeners. If you're listening to this on Spotify, please hit the follow button to make sure that you don't miss new episodes as they come out. See you next week for another episode of the Learning Culture Podcast. Thank you for listening.